Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. Itamar, it's been a while. It's Tuesday, we're about to enter the seventh day of Passover. And I'd like to get a little message out. It's been a while since we've been, of course, disrupted. Our routine has been disrupted with the holiday preparations, but much more than that, our lives have been very offset with the war going on and for the last 6 weeks. And of course, it really began on October 7th of 23, and since then it's been crazy. And of course, I can say going back to the Corona days, things have really been different here, and of course all over the world. I mean, they felt that, but the war here in Israel, I think those who live here can really feel it more than anyone, because we are dealing with these constant rocket firing all over the place, and so much damage being done to homes all over Israel in different areas. But thank God, as far as the loss of life, although it's one person is too much, and the casualties are low, but still, again, the families that lost their loved ones are feeling it greatly. And we just had, unfortunately, just yesterday in Haifa, 4 people killed and those injured, and soldiers in the battlefield in Lebanon, and we've lost too many soldiers and whatever it is. So we see the great light on one side, Hashem watching over us, and then the miracles, but of course the pain and the difficulty and the challenges that we have to cope with during this time. It's hard to explain it unless you're living here in the land. But it is the 7th day of Passover, and I have to talk about that. We're coming into it. And, we know right away, if you think about it, the whole Passover is centered around 2 ingredients, flour and water. You take that flour and you combine it with water, and if you don't get it within 18 minutes in the oven and quickly turn it into matzah, it becomes chametz. So the water is that ingredient that's pretty dangerous if it comes in contact with an ingredient that can be one of the 5 types of grain that can become chametz. And I was thinking about that because we know on the 7th day of Passover is the day the great miracle of the splitting of the sea took place. And so we see the connection of water, something here with water getting involved with the ingredients of flour and making chametz. What's this whole story with the water? What is the story with the splitting of the sea, this miracle? And I was trying to, contemplate creatively and trying to understand what this all means. And I thought about in the beginning of creation, right away we see the splitting of the water, where God divided the waters from above and below, right? So we see that the splitting of the water is something that takes us all the way back to the beginning of creation. It was a splitting of the water. What does that symbolize in reality? And if you think about it, there's a famous teaching which is brought down in our ancient sources, which, the Greeks would use the same division of the 4 foundations of water, fire, wind, and air, right? Water, what is it? Water, fire, wind, which is air, and earth, right? Those 4 basic divisions, which our rabbis talk about in a way of they reflect different types of character traits and bad character traits, right? When a person, for example, is, has the character trait of fire, so he's gets angry and, he's on fire, right? With arrogance and anger. Water represents the desires, the earthly desires, when a person has that, the problem side of water, that he wants to fill his belly up, blow up like a water balloon, and worrying about his personal, desires in this world, the worldly desires we call materialism, the chomer. So in reality, we can look at this symbolize something very interesting, is that the splitting of the water is somehow our taking control of our earthly desires. Now, of course, we're human beings, and we've spoken this many times over. Every human being has to cope and deal with his physical needs, and without them, we can't survive, right? But on the other hand, if we let them take control of ourselves, our physical, personal ego and desires, and everything is about us and all that, so then we are totally swallowed up by the water. Right? So that's the concept where we have this we have to contend, and we have to basically take control over the water, of the problem side of the water, as they say. Now, which is fascinating, we see the great leader, the prophet that is leading Israel throughout the desert and before Moshe Rabbeinu within the slavery of Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu, his whole life begins with dealing. He has to contend. He has to overcome the water problem. And again, don't relate to the rocket missiles. We're having these warnings. Unless we hear the siren go up and down, then we know we have to get to a safety area. But so in reality, Moshe Rabbeinu began when he was placed within the Nile River. And he was contending again. He was trying to survive. His sister Miriam, by the way, is watching out for him, right? And then in her merit, the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam, right, that followed us throughout the desert, which is a connection to water as well. So we see Moshe Rabbeinu's life begins in the water. We go back in the ark, right? The ark, the flood, the great flood of the water of Noah, and having to overcome the waters of the flood, which the flood waters were those. The society was so weakened, and so became so evil, because of their earthly lusting and desires, that they were swallowed up by the waters of the great flood. So we see the connection right away. The water is something that we have to, in one hand, we have to drink, but it has to be in proper measure. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the leader of Israel, to the one who's the emissary to bring, to lead us through the desert and to lead Israel in receiving Torah in the Sinai and all that. So he's the one who has to contend as our leader and show us the way with water. We know Moshe Rabbeinu himself strikes the rock, right? And the rock gives water, and later on he doesn't come to the land of Israel because of that. So even his downfall is through the water. You see, there's something very, very deep over here that is much deeper than the water. Something very deep. If we follow this, we see it's, of course, not only Moshe Rabbeinu that we saw the miracle of splitting of the water on different instances. The most common one everyone realizes, we enter the land of Israel with Joshua. The Jordan River split. As a matter of fact, from Itamar hilltops, we could look out and we could see the mound of water where it stood near Adam as the Jews would cross over in Jericho areas. So water was crossing again, just like the Red Sea. We had to cross over the Jordan River, and we see many instances within the Bible of again dealing with the water. Jacob, our rabbis bring down, when he crossed over the Jordan River as well. He actually used his staff to split the Jordan River. So Jacob himself had that miracle take place. And there are other examples, with Elijah crossing over the Jordan again, splitting the Jordan River. So it's many, many times, not only that much later in history. If we look in the story in the Talmud of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, one of the great rabbis, he went to save the lives of captives. And he had this argument with the river, the Ginai River, and he overcame, and the water split for him. So that was another situation of the water splitting. Again, so we see that in reality, contending with water is a deep symbol, something very symbolic as well, is that it represents our overcoming the physical world. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he goes on Sinai, he says for 40 days he didn't eat or drink, right? Moshe Rabbeinu tells us in the book of Deuteronomy. In other words, he totally overcame the physical need for eating and drinking, for drinking that water. So the spiritual, again, the symbolic teaching of all this is that we have to overcome the physical. And it's really one of the great deep messages behind the splitting of the sea. In our lifetime, we are all constantly trying to cope, and we can bring this to current events, of course, coping with different struggles in our lifetime. And the question is, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with difficulty and challenges in the world? And we all have a lot of, we have to split our own water. Sometimes, we have to find a way through the challenges of life, which is represented through the water, that by causing the water to split. And what was fascinating, on the seventh day of Passover, our rabbis teach us that it wasn't only the water of the sea that split. but they teach us that it was everywhere in the world. When there was a cup of water, even in a glass, the water would split. It was something that it was a tikkun, a tremendous rectification for the entire world, for tikkun olam, that the water we were showed we were able to overcome our earthly desires, our human desires, and funnel them, focus them for only the necessity, the bare necessities of living a world, but living as a spiritual world beyond the physical world, which can bring a person down, but living a holy life. And that's really what Moshe Rabbeinu, our leader, was teaching us, and he had to overcome, and all of Israel, that constant contending with the challenges of water. Now we see this even, it's fascinating, is when they're leaving Egypt, Moshe Rabbeinu, what does he have to do? He has to run over. Everyone's dealing with taking out the spoils, worried about personal gain again, getting the spoils of Egypt. It's coming to them, but nevertheless they're concerned with that more than anything. But what is Moshe Rabbeinu concerned with? He's concerned with Joseph. Joseph is buried somewhere in the Nile River, again in the water. And Moshe Rabbeinu has to have it float to the top, his casket, and get that out of Egypt. And of course, it's very symbolic. Joseph, who represents, he is the peak of that represents more than anything the tikkun yisod, the rectification, the foundation of the desires that are represented by water. That's Joseph, and that's why he's inside the water. And Moshe Rabbeinu is able to cause that casket to rise, overcoming the nature of water, again, by having a casket float to the surface and take out the bones of Joseph. And throughout the desert, it's Joseph's bones that are together with the tablets that were received after we received Torah, that were constantly guiding us through the 40 years in the desert. Now those 40 years, right, remind us of what very clearly the word mayim in Hebrew, water, starts with a mem, has two mems, and mem is a numerical value of 40, right? That again, we were dragged on because it should have been right away, but because of the sin of the terrible sin of the spies and despising the land, the beautiful land of Israel, it was delayed. It was delayed, and again, worried about personal things instead of worrying about our connection to Hashem is what always sets us back. And Joseph, fascinating that his bones represent coming out of that water, overcoming the urges that, again, he's dealing with the wife of Potiphar and able to live a holy spiritual life, is a constant battle against what's represented by the bad side of water. But the Torah says, Ein mayim ela Torah, there's no water but Torah. In other words, the other side of it is to show us the spiritual nourishment. The water, of course, we can't live without being nourished in a physical way, our needs, and of course, in a spiritual way. So the water also has that, it represents Torah. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu's whole life is to show that just how a human being needs that spiritual nourishment. That physical nourishment. He needs it the same way the spiritual nourishment. And without the true water, he will not be able to survive. And that's really the great lesson of overcoming the yesod of water, which we see in the splitting of the sea. Now, our rabbis teach us that this miracle of the splitting of the sea is something that repeats itself every year since Sinai. It's a constant. And therefore, this constant of realizing on this special day of the seventh day of Passover, we are able to again overcome any kind of physical limitations we have, to rise to the spiritual height that we actually went through when coming out of Egypt. As it says, the Shivcha Liyam, the maidservant on the sea, saw more than the prophet of Ezekiel ben Buzi, the prophet of Ezekiel. The maidservant saw more than he did in the special great day of splitting of the sea, which we rose to a great song, Az Yashim Moshe B'nai Yisrael. All of Israel sung together the beautiful song of the splitting of the sea. And that's really that tackling of the Egyptians, who represent the side of Chomer, materialism, actually worship the Nile, right? As we all know. And the Nile gives them everything for them is nature, worshiping nature. Their downfall was through the water, allowing it to swallow them up and totally become immersed within the boundaries of nature. And Israel was able to rise above the forces of nature. And this, my dear friends, we will take to our current events, what's going on now with the war, the battle of the world. What's interesting when I was just thinking about it is, the Donald Trump coming out with a statement that within a certain amount of time, if the Iranians do not, give in to the demands of the U.S. and come up with the agreement of opening up the Straits of Hormuz, he's going to, let out his fury, and he's talking about blowing bridges up, right? Again, the connection to the water, right? Knocking out the infrastructure, etc. All these bridges over water. What's happening in the world, when evil, Rav Kook talks about this in many places, when evil is eliminated in the world, this is a sign, this is a great sign, of course, of our moving forward in the world towards redemption, the Messianic age. And, the world is entrenched with terrible anti-Semitism more than ever, and continuing on that rampage of all those Carlsons and Candice, all those people that are trying to bring the world, together with Qatars, they're using their influences with their money to try to, in universities, and convincing the world that, trying to use all their means to say Israel's the villain, and to give reasons to the world to hate the Jews. But in reality, this is all part of the end of day battle. It's not only a physical war, a war against Hezbollah and the Iranians and Hamas, but it's the spiritual battle more than anything. And that spiritual battle, we're overcoming these evil forces that are really trying to bring Israel down, is more than anything overcoming the, again, as we say, the bad traits, the quality traits within us. Because, everything in this world is unleashed. All the bad things in the world are unleashed when we ourselves are not rectified. But we behave properly as good human beings and have control over our different character traits and all that in perfect way, in the best possible way. So we're actually clearing off all these evil forces that come from without against us. And so it's not only a physical war, but it's also the spiritual battle. So when these evil forces are falling, it means that we ourselves are rectifying, and we're realizing it's coming. It's helping us come to realization what we have to do as human beings to rectify ourselves. And therefore, we have to look at the battle, again, against these evil forces as a great spiritual one as well. And when we will overcome, because of course we will overcome, just as God has always been there for Israel, and we will overcome these evil forces for sure, we will see the great, tremendous blessing that will come out of all this. And we've spoken about this many times. No one, likes, enjoys to see the terrible situation of bloodshed and people falling in battle and suffering in the world. This is a hard thing for a human being who has a heart and a soul, who really cares about humanity. It's a hard thing for us to have to fight against evil in this way, but sometimes we have no choice. And when God is pushing us forward and forcing these wars in the world in order to bring about a true world of peace and harmony in the world, we have to stand up. We can't allow, the evil forces to take over and win the war. That's why it's a miracle, that God is standing with us, and Donald Trump, the President of the United States, has been a tremendous strong wall against these evil forces, together, of course, with Israel and Netanyahu. It's like only these two leaders are really standing up against this evil regime in the world. And at the end of all this, when this is all over, we're going to see a really tremendous new period of light that's going to come out of this. Again, we pray that it's going to happen quickly, with the least amount of suffering possible. I mean, too many people have lost their lives in battle. But, the seventh day of Passover has this tremendous influence. And we know, God willing, we know that at the end the sea split. So we're going to look for another splitting of the sea in this special day coming very soon. And God willing, we will all merit in great miracles and be witness to a new period, a new era that is going to come and make the world a much greater place to be. Chag Sameach. Have a beautiful Passover, the rest of it. And we shall be in touch very soon again. Shalom, shalom.